Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story.
Subscribe, like, and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
It started with a text message that showed up at 7:32 in the morning, right when I was pouring coffee into a chipped mug I should have thrown out 2 apartments ago. A family group message, Aspen next week, from Melissa, complete with ski emojis, hearts, and a gif of someone face-planting into snow. She followed it up 2 minutes later with, just the crew this time, keeping it light and positive. There wasn't even a "Hey Daniel" or a side message with an explanation. Just a neon-bright announcement that the family was taking a holiday trip and, apparently, I wasn't part of the crew. I scrolled through it 3 times, thinking maybe I missed something. Maybe my name was buried under the gifs or squeezed between the lines. But no. There it was: Melissa, our parents, our cousins, and their spouses. All smiles. All included. That's when I saw it. Just the crew this time, keeping it light and positive. And there it was. That word. That knife of a word, polished and smiling like it was doing me a favor. Positive. Which meant I was the opposite. Which meant someone, probably Melissa, definitely Melissa, had decided I was too much of a downer to join this sacred pilgrimage of ski lift selfies and overpriced cocoa. Not because I yelled or cursed or caused fights, but because I wasn't the vibe. I just stared at my phone for a few minutes, watching as the family heart-reacted each other's messages. Dad said, "Can't wait," and Mom added a snowflake emoji. Nobody seemed to notice I hadn't replied. Or if they did, they didn't care enough to say anything. Here's the thing. This isn't about Aspen. I don't even like skiing. I hate being cold, and the only snow I want to see is in a movie. This is about a pattern. A long, exhausting pattern of being tolerated but never included. Of being called complicated when I asked questions and intense when I didn't laugh at jokes that weren't funny. I've been the emotional filter for this family for 42 years, and somewhere along the line, they stopped even pretending they respected me for it. Ever had someone smile in your face while they slowly gut you with politeness? That's what it felt like when my sister uninvited me from our family vacation, because apparently, I'm the dark cloud in the room. What do you even do when your own sister labels you as the infection to be avoided? When she wraps it in kindness and sends it from her iPhone with exclamation points and a heart. I'll tell you what you do. You get quiet. You get real still. And you start remembering. Like the time I covered her car payments during the pandemic because her clients were drying up. Or the time she missed payroll for her 2-woman marketing agency and I covered her assistant's paycheck without blinking. Or when she needed a new website and I fronted the cash through our shared business account, even though she said she'd Venmo me back next week. That was 2 years ago. And maybe that makes me stupid. Or maybe it just makes me the older brother who still thought we're family meant something. Because growing up, it did. When we were kids, it was me walking her home from school, me covering for her when she'd sneak out, me catching hell from Mom and Dad when she got caught lying and I didn't rat her out. And she knew it. She always knew it. So I was too negative to ride in the same plane as them, but not too negative to pay for her marketing agency? Got it. Has anyone in your family ever labeled you the problem just because you didn't play along with the bullshit? Let me know in the comments. I need to know I'm not the only one. There was this one Christmas, maybe 10 years ago, when we all rented a cabin in Vermont. Melissa had just broken up with some guy she was convinced was the one, and she spent the entire trip moping and chain-smoking menthols on the porch. Nobody said she was ruining the vibe then. Nobody voted her off the family island. I brought her hot cider, sat with her in the cold, listened to her cry and talk circles about what she should have said. And now I'm the one who doesn't fit? Here's what people don't get about being labeled negative. It's not about what you say, it's about how uncomfortable you make them by telling the truth. And I've always been the one to say it. When Dad makes sexist comments at the table, I call it out. When Mom plays her guilt games, I push back. When the family gossips about each other behind closed doors, I say, maybe we should just be honest to each other's faces. That's when the room gets quiet. That's when I become too intense. But I wasn't intense when Melissa needed help with a rebrand. Or when she asked to borrow my designer, just for a week. I was useful then. Helpful. Quiet. So when I saw that text, those emojis, that glittery fake cheerfulness, I didn't throw my phone or scream into the void. I poured more coffee. I sat down. And I started making a list. Not of what I'd say. Not of how I'd clear the air. I've done that dance. I've apologized for making people uncomfortable with my presence more times than I can count. No, this time, the list was simple. A breakdown of every single thing I pay for that keeps my sister's business above water. The software subscriptions. The vendor contracts. The email marketing platform. The monthly retainer for the copywriter she still owes me money for. And the shared business card, the one I've been quietly paying off because she just needs a bit more time. And as I typed each line out, something shifted in me. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness anymore. It was something colder, quieter, more final. Something like, if I'm not family enough to be included, then maybe I'm not family enough to fund your fantasy either. I didn't send a reply to the group chat. I didn't ask questions. I just watched as the messages kept pouring in, can't wait for snow angels, shots in the hot tub, and realized they weren't even pretending I was part of this anymore. Not really. Not in the way that matters. So I closed the chat, opened my laptop, and logged into the accounts. No warning. No explanation. Just a quiet, deliberate beginning to something I'd been too scared to do for far too long. You'd be surprised how many little things keep a small business looking alive from the outside while it's actually rotting on the inside. People see the shiny posts, the curated filters, the flawless branding, and think someone must be thriving. But the truth is, Melissa's marketing agency wasn't even treading water unless I was behind the curtain keeping the whole charade from collapsing. And the wildest part? Nobody in the family knew. Not a single one of them, not Mom, not Dad, not Aunt Linda, who thinks she's a business coach because she reads one self-help book a year, had a clue that Melissa's so-called empire was basically held together with duct tape and my credit card. It started off innocent enough, like most traps do. Years ago, when I was already doing all right running back-end systems for small e-commerce brands, Melissa came to me with this breathless, caffeine-fueled pitch about starting her own agency. She had the vision, the connections, the confidence. What she didn't have was a plan, or clients, or capital. But she had me, and back then, I still believed in showing up for your family no matter what. I said I'd help. I'd cover the early costs, get her set up with software, give her access to my project management tools, even loop in one of my freelance assistants part-time until she could afford her own. That until became a kind of endless hallway we never reached the end of. One tool turned into 3, then 5. A temporary website subscription I offered to manage is still billed to my account today. When her email list provider raised its price, she asked if I could just keep it on the shared card for now, and I said yes, because back then I was still mistaking patience for kindness. There's a difference, by the way. One builds boundaries, the other buries you under them. By the second year, I was covering her payroll. Not all of it, just her assistant's hours, which always conveniently doubled around holidays and launches. I never once saw the assistant's face. Never got an invoice, just a PayPal charge every other Friday with a note that read something like team support or marketing admin. Melissa always said she'd pay me back, and I always acted like I believed her, because the alternative was admitting she wasn't going to. The crazy part is how little I asked for in return. No stake in the business. No credit. Not even a thank you most weeks. I was just her quiet little funding department, the one who always answered the phone and always clicked approve. I think some part of her assumed I'd keep doing it forever, just like I'd always fix things when we were kids. Melissa breaks it, Daniel patches it. Melissa overspends, Daniel makes the numbers work. Melissa throws a tantrum at Thanksgiving and Daniel smooths it over with Mom. It's a hell of a job being the family's emotional janitor. You clean up after everyone and eventually, they start acting like the mess was never theirs. But when she sent that text, announcing the Aspen trip like it was some royal decree, I started doing something I hadn't done in a long time. I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I looked through the bank statements, the auto debits, the recurring charges that I'd stopped even noticing. Dozens of them. Hundreds of dollars every month, bleeding out of my business account into hers, keeping her little empire from crumbling. And for what? So she could tell the family I was too negative? So she could make me the villain in a story where she was still cashing my checks behind the scenes? It wasn't just insulting, it was delusional. Melissa had started to believe her own mythology, the one where she was a self-made boss babe and I was just the bitter brother who didn't know how to relax. That's what she told people, by the way. That I was high-strung. That I saw problems everywhere. Meanwhile, I was the only reason she had a working invoice system, a functioning domain, and a business email that didn't bounce. It wasn't anger that filled me as I scrolled through all those receipts. It was something colder, more dangerous. Clarity. The kind of clarity that comes after a long fever breaks and you realize you've been hallucinating loyalty. I stared at that spreadsheet and thought, if I'm too negative to be invited, maybe my money should be too negative to be accepted. I didn't do anything right away. I let the idea simmer. Sat with it. Ran my fingers along the edges of it like it was a blade I was deciding whether or not to use. Part of me wanted to call her and give her a chance to explain, or at least squirm. But the bigger part of me, older, more tired, less naive, knew what she'd say. She'd laugh it off. Say it wasn't personal. Say she thought I wouldn't enjoy the trip anyway. That she was trying to protect my energy, some faux therapist bullshit she picked up from Instagram Reels. So I stayed quiet. And instead of calling her, I opened my accounts. I started pulling levers, slowly, carefully. Disabled auto-renewals. Removed her email access from shared tools. Canceled the assistant's PayPal billing agreement. I kept track of every move, documented it like a war log. Not because I needed evidence, but because I wanted to remember the moment I finally stopped playing the fool. Nobody screamed. Nobody noticed. Not yet. Because when someone's used to you cleaning up their messes, they don't notice when the broom gets put down. They only notice when the garbage starts to pile up. And I was done cleaning. The first thing I canceled was the Adobe Creative Cloud subscription because it cost over $70 a month and I knew for a fact she hadn't used Photoshop in weeks. That one felt easy, almost surgical. One login, 2 clicks, a confirmation screen that asked if I was sure, and just like that, gone. The silence afterward was loud in a way I hadn't anticipated. I thought I'd feel triumphant or at least a little buzz of vengeance crawling under my skin, but all I felt was stillness, like I had stepped outside of a house that was on fire and finally realized I didn't have to run back in for the photo albums. Then came the business tools, Slack, Asana, her newsletter platform, the booking software she used to schedule fake client meetings to make herself look busy. Each of those accounts were linked to my card, my email, my willingness to ignore how deep she'd dug her hands into my pockets. I changed passwords, revoked user access, canceled payment plans. One by one, the systems she leaned on vanished under her feet, and I didn't say a word. Not to her, not to the family, not even to myself. It was like pulling life support from a patient who never once said thank you for being kept alive. What people never talk about when they discuss revenge is how quiet it can be. There's no dramatic music, no thunderclap in the background, no evil laughter echoing in the distance. Just the sound of your own breath as you finally stop holding it. The silence after a click. That's what it was for me, just a long string of clicks and confirmations and empty inboxes. It felt clinical, almost detached. But every click was a decision, and every decision was long overdue. I remember the exact moment the first text came through. It was 4 hours after I cut off the marketing platform she used to run all her brand identity campaigns, and it just said, "Hey, did something happen to the account?" No punctuation. No greeting. No warmth. Just the kind of text you send when you know something's off, but don't want to admit you know exactly what. I stared at it for maybe 10 full minutes. Then I locked my phone and walked away. 3 more messages came in over the next 2 hours. The tone shifted gradually, from confused professional to mildly annoyed sibling. First, she asked if I had updated billing without telling her. Then she followed it with a slightly sharper, "If you're making changes, I need access." And finally, she wrote, "This is really unprofessional, Daniel. Clients are getting error messages." That was the one that made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly Melissa. She'd decided I was unprofessional for cutting off the services she never paid for in the first place. The entitlement in that sentence could have fueled a private jet. By the time the calls started coming in, I was halfway through a grilled cheese sandwich and watching a documentary about people who disappear from their own lives and start over under fake names. Not because I wanted to vanish, but because I finally understood the temptation. Melissa called 3 times in a row. No voicemail. Then again, 30 minutes later. I turned off my ringer. The silence felt good. It wasn't until the voicemails started rolling and that the panic crept into her voice. Not desperation, not yet, but that underlying frustration of someone who knows they've lost control, but still believes they can scream their way back into power. "Daniel, I don't know what you're doing, but this is ridiculous," she said in the first one, her voice clipped and tight. "You're sabotaging everything we've built." That word, "we," landed like a punch. Because there was never a we unless it was convenient for her. It had always been me building and her standing on top of it with a megaphone and a manicure. The next voicemail came about an hour later. This time, the tone was thinner. "I need you to call me back. Please. You can't just shut things down like this without warning." That please wasn't genuine. It was tactical. The way someone says it when they've been told it works. I still didn't reply. Then the group chat lit up. The same one where the Aspen trip had been planned without me. Suddenly, I was very visible again. Mom sent a passive-aggressive, "Hey honey, Melissa's saying there's some confusion about your shared tools. Everything okay?" Dad followed with a dry, "Your sister is under a lot of stress right now. Maybe you two should talk it through like adults." That was rich coming from him, a man who once ghosted his own brother for missing a barbecue. Melissa went nuclear. "Daniel's sabotaging me. I don't know what's wrong with him. I think he's having some kind of breakdown." That one hit different. Not because it hurt. Not even because it surprised me. But because it was so rehearsed, so perfectly predictable. That was always her move. Paint me as unstable the second she couldn't control the narrative. It was the same when we were kids. If I didn't agree with her version of events, suddenly I was too sensitive or overreacting. Now I was sabotaging. Now I was the villain. Funny how I was invisible for so long, until their rent payment bounced. Because what she didn't realize, what none of them seemed to grasp, was that I'd been their emotional and financial scaffolding for so long they forgot the ground existed. And now the structure was collapsing, not because I destroyed it, but because I walked away from holding it up. And they were pissed. Not scared, not remorseful, pissed. Like I had broken some unspoken contract they never even admitted existed. That night, I turned off my phone completely. Not silent mode. Not do not disturb. I powered the whole thing down and set it in a drawer. And for the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of being chased, cornered, or smothered. The truth was, I hadn't ruined anything. I had simply ended my part in a lie. One click at a time. The first call came in at 9:43 on a Monday morning, just as I was stepping out of the shower, toweling off and still feeling the weight of that eerie silence that had taken over my phone the past few days. I should have let it ring, should have known better, but habit is a hell of a drug when it comes to family. I picked up without checking the caller ID, and there it was, my mother's voice, syrupy and too soft, the same voice she used when I broke my arm in 3rd grade, and she blamed me for not watching where I was going. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" she asked, pausing just long enough to let the guilt creep in before continuing. Melissa said you've been acting strange lately, and honestly, your father and I are just worried. That word, worried, sat on my chest like a stone. Not because it meant anything sincere, but because I'd heard it 1,000 times before, and never once had it actually meant they were worried about me. It meant I was doing something inconvenient, unpredictable, or embarrassing. That's what worried meant in our house. You're making things uncomfortable, Daniel, and we don't like discomfort unless it's someone else's. I stood there, half-dressed and dripping water onto the floor, staring at my reflection in the mirror while she went on about how Melissa had called crying, how she didn't understand why I'd cut her off so suddenly, and how I needed to be the bigger person. Because she's going through a lot right now. That last part almost made me laugh out loud. Going through a lot? Was she the one who just realized her entire business model was propped up by someone she casually discarded from the family trip like last week's leftovers? I didn't say much. I let my mother talk herself in circles, rambling through faux concern and poorly disguised guilt trips, layering on phrases like, "We just want you to be happy," and "It's not like you to be so cold." Not like me? According to whom? The same people who once told me I was too emotional to be taken seriously when I cried at Grandpa's funeral? Or was it the same people who told me to calm down when I found out Melissa lied about needing rent money but spent it on a weekend spa retreat? The next call came from Dad, and his approach was the usual mix of bluntness and passive judgment that he's perfected over decades of not knowing how to express a single genuine emotion without layering it in condescension. "I don't know what's going on with you," he said, "but this isn't how adults handle things, son. If you had an issue with your sister, you should have talked to us before making decisions that affect the whole family." And there it was, the whole family. The phrase that always meant everyone but you, because I was only included when I was useful, compliant, or quiet. I hung up halfway through his lecture, right when he started talking about setting an example. I was done being their example. Done being their scapegoat. Done being the only one in this family who ever paid the price for someone else's mistakes. Melissa, of course, was still hard at work behind the scenes, spinning her little narrative with the finesse of someone who's been rehearsing her victim act since childhood. She sent out texts to extended family claiming I'd snapped, that I was not well, that I was lashing out because I refused to get help. Help for what? For finally telling her no? For daring to pull the plug on the freeloading machine she'd built with my credit card and empty promises? I found out from a cousin, one of the few who still talked to me like I was human, that Melissa had even floated the idea that I might be having some kind of episode. As if she were gently implying I was mentally unstable without actually saying the words. Classic Melissa. Manipulate the narrative just enough to look like she's being kind while planting the seeds of doubt that grow into full-blown isolation. She did it in high school when she got caught shoplifting and told our parents I dared her to do it. She did it in college when she failed a group project and said I was the one who stressed her out. She's always had this way of flipping the lights just enough so that her shadow doesn't show. I thought about defending myself, typing out long messages, sending screenshots of all the bills I'd covered, maybe even recording a voice memo laying everything out in detail. But the truth is, it wouldn't have mattered. Because people don't believe the quiet one until he screams, and by then, they've already decided he's crazy. So instead of screaming, I did the one thing they'd never expect. I deleted the family group chat. Just like that, gone. No explanation, no goodbye, no final message to stir the pot. Just silence. And the moment I did it, something inside me clicked into place. It wasn't peace, exactly, but it was the absence of chaos, which is as close as I've ever come. And it was loud. Not in sound, but in presence. That silence became a kind of roar in my life, one that filled the space where guilt used to live. It echoed in the spaces where their expectations used to pin me down. It gave me back the breath I didn't know I'd been holding for years. They kept trying after that, individual texts, calls, voicemails, all flavored with varying levels of manipulation. Mom's messages were still sugar-coated poison. "Please, honey, don't shut us out. We love you. Melissa says she's willing to talk, but only if you're calm. Calm. That was rich. Dads were shorter, colder. Grow up. Handle your business. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Melissa didn't bother texting anymore. She sent a 2-paragraph email full of vague regrets and zero accountability, ending with, "I'm still your sister, no matter what." I didn't respond to any of them, because here's the truth they never wanted to admit. I've spent most of my life being cast as the villain whenever I stopped playing the fool. And if that's what they need me to be, if their fragile family story only holds together when I'm the one they can all point fingers at, then so be it. You want me to be the villain? Fine. But at least I'm not pretending to be the hero while stealing from my brother. There's a particular kind of silence that fills a room when someone's about to show you the truth you already suspect, but have been too tired, too hopeful, or too cowardly to look it straight in the face. That was the silence sitting between me and Victor, my accountant of almost 8 years, as he slowly turned his computer monitor toward me and cleared his throat in that quiet, apologetic way only people in finance seem to master. I'd asked for a full breakdown, not just of current business expenses, but of the entire last calendar year, every vendor, every automatic draft, every single transaction tagged under shared business costs. I wanted to see the truth laid bare, no rounding, no assumptions, no pretending this was normal. Victor had asked once, back in April, if I wanted to revisit some of the recurring charges tied to the shared account. He'd said it lightly, casually, like someone trying not to overstep. At the time, I brushed it off, told him Melissa was still building momentum, that the expenses were temporary, and that I had things under control. I said it so casually you'd think I believed it myself. Maybe I did. Maybe I needed to. But now, staring at the numbers stacked in neat, damning rows on that screen, there was no room left for denial. Melissa hadn't just leaned on the business, she'd been clinging to it like a parasite, quietly siphoning off hundreds, then thousands of dollars over time, slipping in just under the threshold where I would have noticed without looking. It wasn't just the software platforms or assistant payments I knew about. There were random advertising charges, content creator fees, branded merchandise purchases, outsourced pitch decks, and monthly consultation calls with a branding guru I'd never even heard her mention. All of it billed to the shared business card. All of it categorized as expenses she never once offered to reimburse. Victor didn't say much while I scanned the report. He knew me well enough to stay quiet, to let the math speak for itself. Numbers don't lie the way people do. They don't dress things up or twist meaning with tone. They just sit there, bare and unflinching, and ask if you're finally ready to stop pretending. It wasn't the size of the debt that made my stomach turn, it was the shape of it. The slow, methodical way it built over time, like a wall of termites eating through foundation while the house still looks picture perfect from the outside. The precision of her theft was what got to me. She knew just how much to take, how often, and when to stop and start again, so it wouldn't raise alarms. That wasn't desperation. That was calculation. That was someone who had studied me closely enough to know I'd never check the drawer if she left the front room clean. I didn't speak for a long time. I just sat there, watching the years of generosity mutate into a spreadsheet of betrayal. Eventually, Victor leaned forward and said, "You've been very generous, Daniel. But you might want to close that joint card before the next billing cycle." He said it gently, like a man offering water to someone who hadn't realized they were dying of thirst. I nodded, but I didn't thank him because thanks felt too small and too late. Walking back to my car, I couldn't stop replaying a memory I hadn't thought of in years. We were kids, maybe 9 and 11, and Melissa was getting picked on by this boy named Evan in our neighborhood. He used to call her names, tug her ponytail, push her books off the swing set at the park. One day, I shoved him hard enough that he fell and chipped a tooth, and I got grounded for a week while Melissa cried and thanked me like I was her personal hero. Mom told me I overreacted. Dad said I needed to control my emotions, but Melissa beamed like I'd slain a dragon, and I remember thinking, at least someone knows I'm on their side. It hit me in that moment. standing in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles that she hadn't changed. She'd just found a cleaner way to pull the same con. She wasn't the girl getting bullied anymore. She'd become Evan. Maybe she always was. Maybe I just refused to see it because I was too wrapped up in being the big brother who protects and provides and pays, no matter what. I'd held onto that identity like a lifeline because if I wasn't the protector, then what was I? Turns out the only real parasite in my life was the one with my last name. The worst part wasn't even the money, it was the realization that I had let it go this far, convinced myself that silence was strength, that patience was maturity, that looking the other way made me noble instead of naive. I'd wrapped my neglect in the language of compassion and handed her the keys to the vault, then stood back and wondered why I always felt broke in places I couldn't name. I started the engine and stared straight ahead, not at the road, but at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't look angry. I didn't even look sad. I looked tired. And that scared me more than anything else. Because tired people stop fighting. Tired people give up. And I wasn't ready to give up, not yet. So I drove home in silence. No music. No calls. Just the sound of my own breathing and the familiar ache in my chest that comes when you finally stop lying to yourself and realize the enemy was never outside the gates. She was invited in. She had her own room. She was family. It always starts with a call from Mom, and it always sounds the same, like she's rehearsed the script a dozen times before dialing, and she's trying to hit just the right amount of broken-hearted tremble in her voice to make me feel like the monster they need me to be. This time, it was tears right out of the gate, not even a hello, just the soft sob of a woman trying very hard to sound wounded instead of manipulative. "Danny," she said, using the version of my name she knows I haven't answered to in decades, "I don't know what's happening anymore, but your sister is hurting, and your father and I are just so tired of this." There it was again, that word, tired, as if I hadn't been carrying the fatigue of this family on my back for over 30 years, as if they weren't the ones who demanded silence every time I raised my voice to say something real. "You have to let this go," she said, through sniffles that felt more like a performance than anything sincere. "Melissa's trying. She really is. She sent you a message, didn't she?" I didn't respond, didn't say a word. I just held the phone to my ear and let her keep talking while I stared out the window at my neighbor's overgrown lawn and tried to remember what it felt like to have a conversation with her that didn't end in guilt or gaslight. Later that afternoon came the voicemail from Dad, because he never calls when he can record a lecture instead. His voice was firm, the kind of firm that used to make me straighten my spine as a kid and wonder what I'd done wrong even when I hadn't done anything at all. "Son, I don't know what you think you're proving by cutting everyone out, but this isn't how grown men handle family disagreements." That tone of his, low and grave and disappointed, always came laced with a quiet threat, like if I didn't make things right, I'd lose some invisible part of myself I was supposed to value, his approval, maybe. Though I don't know if I ever really had it to begin with. "I raised you better than this," he added at the end, like that was supposed to be the trump card, the line that would shake something loose in me and make me fall back in line. But I didn't fall. I didn't move. I sat on my porch drinking cold coffee and listening to the dying cicadas in the trees and thought about how easy it is to talk about raising someone when you've never really known how to meet them where they are. Dad never raised me. He instructed me. He corrected me. He taught me that love had conditions and affection was earned by keeping the peace, even when the peace was built on silence and self-denial. Melissa's text came 2 days later, and it was exactly what I expected, just vague enough to be considered an apology, just hollow enough to carry no weight. "Hey, I just wanted to say I'm sorry if I hurt you. I really didn't mean for things to get this bad. Can we talk sometime soon?" That "if" in there, tucked neatly into the first sentence like a hidden splinter, said everything. If I hurt you. Not because I hurt you. Not I'm sorry for what I did, but if. Like the pain might be imaginary, like the damage was debatable. She always knew how to say just enough to make herself sound mature while saying nothing at all. I blocked her. Not out of anger, not even out of spite, but because I needed the space her voice filled in my head every time she pretended she hadn't done anything wrong. I needed her absence to be real, not just digital. And maybe that was the first time in our whole lives I chose myself over the illusion of family. Maybe that was the first time I stopped mistaking closeness for love. That weekend, someone knocked on my door around 6 in the evening, just as the sun was melting into the trees behind my house. I didn't have to look through the peephole to know it was someone from the family. I could feel it in the way the knocking was too polite, too persistent, like someone trying to convince themselves they weren't being invasive. I let the knocking go on for several minutes, then stopped when it did. No one left a note, but a few hours later, I got a text from my cousin Jenna that said, "Hey, Aunt Lisa said she stopped by to check in on you. Just want you to know we all love you and hope you'll come back around soon." Come back around. As if I had wandered off without warning, instead of finally stepping away from a table where I'd never been truly welcome unless I was paying the tab. As if my silence was a betrayal, not a boundary. It's wild how fast people start missing your negativity once it stops paying their bills. Suddenly I wasn't just the difficult one, the intense one, the one who always brought the mood down. Now I was the necessary one. Now they remembered I existed. Now they needed something: peace, clarity, money, forgiveness, anything that would stitch their version of the family back together again. But I didn't answer. I didn't show up. I didn't call back. Because this wasn't just about Melissa anymore. This was about all of them. About the way they let her take and lie and spin her stories while I cleaned up after her in the name of keeping the peace. About the way they'd chosen comfort over truth, smiles over honesty, and her over me every single time it counted. And if they thought a few voicemails, a few tears, and one half-hearted text would be enough to pull me back into the storm, then they never really knew me at all. I don't know if I'll ever answer them again. I don't know if this silence will become permanent, or if I'll wake up one day and miss something about all the chaos I walked away from. But for now, the stillness is enough. For now, the locked door and the blocked number are my peace treaty with myself. And I'm not breaking it. I didn't sleep that night, not because of anxiety or guilt or anything dramatic like that, but because the silence in my house had finally settled into something too deep to ignore, like the kind of quiet you only notice after days of storm. It wasn't peaceful exactly, more like still, this motionless, humming kind of stillness that made every small sound feel sharp and loud. The radiator clanked in the hallway and I flinched like it was a door slamming. A dog barked 2 blocks over, and I nearly stood up to check if someone was outside. But nobody was there. Nobody had been there for days. I made tea sometime around 2:30 in the morning and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop, still open from the day before, and stared at a blank document like it was a confession booth waiting for me to start talking. I didn't know what I wanted to say at first. I just knew I wanted to say something. Not out loud. Not in some dramatic voicemail or middle-of-the-night call. Just words on a screen. Just me, typing to no one. Or maybe to everyone. The first sentence was easy. You don't get to be shocked now. And it spilled out from there like a dam-breaking line after line of things I'd been too polite, too tired, or too afraid to say when they actually mattered. I wrote about every family dinner where I was made the joke, the punchline, the "oh here comes Daniel with his serious face" guy. I wrote about the birthdays I paid for when Melissa forgot to pitch in, the electric bills I covered for our parents when they didn't want to ask her because she was already under so much pressure. I wrote about the holidays where I sat through hours of fake smiles and careful silences just to avoid becoming the problem again. I wrote about the time Melissa crashed her car and called me before anyone else, not because she wanted comfort, but because she needed a ride and didn't want to deal with Dad's judgment. I wrote about the endless times I told her it was okay, that I understood, that family means showing up even when it hurts. I wrote about how I bought that lie like it was gospel and wore it like armor until it rusted into my bones. I wrote about the Aspen trip, the damned vacation that wasn't really about skiing or family or snow, but about them finally saying out loud what they'd been whispering for years, that I didn't fit. That my honesty was too heavy, that my presence was inconvenient, that my refusal to pretend made me too negative to bring along. And I wrote that I heard them, loud and clear, and that I was done playing the role of the misunderstood villain just to make their stories cleaner. For 2 hours I typed, pausing only to breathe, barely rereading what I wrote, letting it all pour out like poison I'd been holding in my mouth for far too long. I ended it with one last line, one that landed so hard even I had to sit back in my chair after typing it. You never wanted a brother. You wanted a version of me that didn't exist, and now that he's gone, you're mourning a ghost you helped create. Then I saved the document. I didn't send it. I never even addressed it. Because halfway through reading it back, I realized something sharp and final. They wouldn't understand it, even if they wanted to. They wouldn't see the pain behind the lines, or the years of loyalty I'd buried under their convenience. They'd read it as bitterness, or worse, as proof that I really was the unstable one, the problem child with a flair for drama. They'd talk about how I'd snapped or how I was processing things the wrong way, and they'd keep right on loving each other loudly and conditionally while I stood on the outside holding the truth like it was a disease. So instead, I opened a new document and started again. But this time, I wasn't writing to them. I was writing to me. It started simply, not with accusation, not with pain, but with something softer than I expected. You did what you had to do. That was the first line, and I let it sit there on the page like a hand on my shoulder. I wrote about how tired I was, how long I'd carried the weight of everyone else's comfort, how I'd been taught since childhood to be useful before being whole. I told myself that kindness without boundaries isn't love, it's martyrdom. I told myself that silence may keep the peace, but it also keeps the pain. I told myself that walking away from people who only love you when you're convenient isn't cruel, it's survival. I promised myself that from now on, my time, my energy, my money, and my name would no longer be offered as currency to people who didn't value the cost. I promised I'd stop explaining myself to those committed to misunderstanding me. I promised that next time I felt that old pull to fix things, to smooth them over, to apologize just to keep the family intact, I'd ask whether it was love I was protecting, or just their illusion of control. That letter, the one I wrote to myself, didn't need to be sent. It needed to be read, again and again, until the words didn't sting anymore, until the truth stopped feeling like a betrayal and started feeling like a beginning. Some truths don't need to be told to the people who broke you, they need to be told to yourself. And that night, in a house quiet enough to finally think clearly, I told myself everything I needed to hear. And for once, it was enough. It's been just over 4 months since I canceled everything, the payments, the passwords, the pleasantries, and in that time, I've come to understand that silence isn't just the absence of noise. It's the place where you find out who you are when no one's tugging on your sleeve for a favor. At first, the quiet felt like exile, like I'd wandered too far from some invisible center and lost the right to call myself part of something, even if that something had been a one-sided arrangement since the beginning. But eventually, the stillness stopped sounding like punishment and started feeling like a room I could finally breathe in. Melissa's name still shows up now and then, but not in my inbox, not on my phone, and certainly not at my front door. No, now it shows up in the form of half-hearted social media posts, throwback to better days captions under filtered photos, cryptic quotes about betrayal from unknown authors, the kind of performative pain that's meant to trigger sympathy without providing context. I saw someone comment once, "Hang in there, girl, your strength inspires me," and I nearly choked on my coffee. If only they knew her strength came from using other people like scaffolding and calling it resilience. Her business, the one she built out of buzzwords and borrowed resources, is visibly unraveling. The branding has stopped updating, the client testimonials have dried up, and the blog that used to churn out authentic lifestyle content every week has gone quiet. There's only so long you can run on borrowed time before the clock demands payment, and without me holding the gears together behind the scenes, her entire machine has started to rust. But still, she pretends. She posts. She curates. She rewrites the story every time someone asks, because rewriting has always been easier than accountability. Our parents still try, though not as often as they used to. It's like they're hoping if they space out the attempts enough, I'll forget how calculated their silences were when I needed their support the most. Mom sends seasonal texts now. Happy Thanksgiving. Hope you're well. Merry Christmas. We're thinking of you. Spring's almost here. Just wanted to say hi, each one carefully avoiding the words that might matter. No apologies. No acknowledgement. Just the ghost of concern floating behind a message she probably stared at for 15 minutes before hitting send. Dad, ever the master of unspoken judgment, sent me a birthday card this year for the first time in at least a decade. It wasn't handwritten. It wasn't even thoughtful. Just one of those pre-printed cards with a vague sentiment and a signature scrawled so quickly it looked like he was embarrassed to claim it. No message. No effort. Just enough to check a box so he could say, if ever questioned, that he'd reached out. And maybe this is the part where I say I miss them. Maybe this is the scene where I admit I'd trade it all just to have them back, dysfunction and all. But that wouldn't be honest, and if there's anything I've learned, it's that honesty is the one thing I can't afford to put down anymore. I don't miss the noise. I don't miss the walking on eggshells. I don't miss the way my worth was always tied to what I could offer, rather than who I was when I stopped offering it. Still, the loneliness creeps in sometimes, not because I regret what I did, but because for all the damage, for all the silence, there's still a part of me that wonders what it might have felt like to be loved without conditions. To be the son who didn't have to shrink to make room for his sister's spotlight. To be the brother who wasn't praised only in private, but defended in public. That part doesn't ache every day, but when it does, it cuts deep. Last week, I drove past my parents' house for the first time since everything fell apart. I didn't plan to stop. I was just running errands, and muscle memory took the wheel before my brain could steer otherwise. But once I was in the neighborhood, I figured what harm could there be in passing by? The lawn was freshly mowed. The porch looked the same. Even the old rocking chair was still in its corner, unmoved since I was a teenager sneaking cigarettes out there at 2 a.m, hiding from the world and waiting for someone to notice I wasn't okay. I parked across the street and sat there for almost 10 minutes, engine running, watching the house like it was part of a dream I'd outgrown. And then I did something I hadn't planned. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the spare key, still taped to the same faded piece of cardboard Dad had given me when I moved out at 22, saying, just in case. I hadn't used it in years, hadn't even thought about it until that exact moment. But there it was, cool in my hand, a relic from a version of our family that I now knew never really existed. I stepped out of the car and crossed the street, walking slow, not hesitant but careful, like every step might change something I couldn't take back. I stood on the porch with the key in my hand, staring at the door that used to swing open for Sunday dinners and birthday celebrations and all those forced holidays where we smiled through gritted teeth and pretended everything was fine. The door looked the same, but everything else had changed. Or maybe I was finally seeing it clearly. I stood there long enough for a neighbor to walk by and nod at me, long enough for the sun to shift behind a tree and cast a long shadow across the steps. I held the key up once, turned it in my fingers, and then lowered it again. I didn't knock. I didn't ring the bell. I just stood there with the weight of everything that had been said and unsaid pressing down on my shoulders like it had every year since I was old enough to understand that love in this family came with a price tag. And standing there in the thick silence of that moment, I asked myself the only question that still mattered. If standing up for myself makes me too negative, then what the hell does that make all of you? I never went inside. I got back in my car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. Not out of bitterness, not out of pride, but because sometimes the most honest thing you can do is keep walking, and let them wonder what you might have said if you ever decided to come home.